Hi everyone, welcome to the Doug webinar series. We are here today to look at the session called Collaborate Like a Boss, Channel Your Inner End User. So who am I and why am I presenting on this topic? My name is Allie Nelson. I'm a senior functional consultant and functional capability lead at Stoneridge Software, and I'm the co-host of Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. I have 10 years of experience with Dynamics 365 or Microsoft CRM at end user companies, and I'm really passionate for guiding users through change for successful projects. A lot of my background is in training, so I really have an eye and an ear for listening for things that can help out our end users and just making sure that we develop tools that are ultimately helping them to work more efficiently and making them happier in their jobs. So just our agenda for today, this is where we're going. I'm going to start by talking about the importance of asking questions. Then we'll learn the business, learn the job, understand the process, put yourself in their shoes, speak the language, answer the call, recommend, communicate, and be an ally. A lot of this probably doesn't make too much sense right now, but I promise it'll make more sense as we go. You can see I have a lot of tips for you to help you collaborate more within your technology teams and with your end users. So first, we're going to talk about how to get started with a new project or product. The first thing you want to do when you're getting started with a new project or on a new product is to make sure you're asking a lot of questions to your end users. Don't shy away from the why. And I know you've probably heard this a lot, but there truly is no such thing as a stupid question. If your end users are giving you information and you're not understanding what they're saying to you, pause, digest what they've said, and ask a follow-up question to try to figure out more. They know their processes a lot better than you do, and you are trying to get a deep dive as quickly as you can to get up to speed with the processes that they're very familiar with and are part of their day-to-day lives. So do not hesitate to ask as many questions or any question that comes to mind. When you're asking questions, always ask follow-up questions. Ask questions like, what comes next? Who else is involved? How do your processes differ from your teammates? So when you're thinking about things like what comes next and who else is involved, you're really trying to get a whole idea of the big picture of the process that you're talking about. If you aren't asking questions like that, a lot of the times what happens is people will just answer the very specific question that you asked based off of their own job or their responsibilities. If you ask them questions like, so what comes after you send the customer the invoice, then they'll start giving you more processes that overlap with other teams. And it's really important for you to understand that whole spectrum of all the business processes involved. By asking questions like, how do your processes differ from your teammates? You're starting to identify issues that may lie within the organization of everybody does something a little bit differently, right? How many times have we heard that? Well, I don't know how my teammates do it, but this is how I do it. And so if you're only working with one or two people, asking this question of how does it differ from your teammates really starts to open up their minds as to how their processes might differ from everyone else's. And we'll start giving you those more well-rounded answers of, oh, I think Tim does it this way, and I think Jenny does it this way. Another question that I love to ask is, how did you learn this? Because a lot of the times what people are doing is speaking from their tribal knowledge. And what might be happening too is, oh, well, the person who was in my position before me just told me to do it this way. And you really start uncovering differences in not only how different people on the same team do things, but that the whole team might be doing things differently than their manager or their supervisor might be expecting them to do that. Next, learn the business. This is key. You want to make sure that you understand the business as best as possible when you're kicking off new projects. So before your initial meeting, really research the business. Find out what they do. Find out what they're involved with. And the other key here too, when I'm saying learn the business, is I'm not necessarily referring to what I might do as a consultant, right? Where I'm learning all these new businesses that I'm not an employee of. This is also key for you if you're working within the same company as the business that you're doing the project for. What do they do? Who are their leaders? Who's all involved in these processes? You really want to understand what that department or what that group of people does before you start engaging in this new project with them. Talk to some of your teammates who may have worked on that team or who have worked in similar industries in the past. So if you know of anyone that has been on this team or someone that you're familiar with, just ask them. Say, hey, I know that you've worked in manufacturing before. I don't have a lot of experience there. Can you please give me the lowdown on what exactly this means or what this terminology means? So leverage your network. Talk to people that you know that have experiences within that same business area to gain as much information as you can. Next, you want to make sure that you identify business objectives. So what are you trying to achieve by implementing this tool or software? Really understand that. If they come back and say, well, I don't know, I just feel like we need to update our systems, then the chances that your implementation is going to be successful are a little bit lower than if you know, oh no, sales is suffering. They really need this tool because they really need to increase their sales. So it's really important to know what the business is trying to do by implementing this new tool or product. You can also review organizational charts or org charts. Those are really helpful to understand where your stakeholders lie within the business and to, again, further identify who all is involved with this whole process. You can see who a leader might be at the top of the chain, and you can see everybody that's a step below or everybody involved in that process. It will also help you to start to identify your subject matter experts, or as I lovingly like to call them, your best friends. So by looking at this org chart, you may start to identify that, okay, nope, I don't need to engage with the CEO or the VP. Where my sweet spot might be is going to be the supervisor, the manager, and the end user specifically. So who's going to be using this tool? So by reviewing those org charts, you're really starting to understand who some of your subject matter experts are going to be and who you really want to interact with most frequently on this project. Ultimately, you really want to identify where your project fits into the big picture. Your project might be a subset of a bigger initiative, right? So if you understand the business objectives and say, like, we are overall trying to increase fertilizer sales 200% over the next 5 years, right? Then maybe there's other initiatives in there, like making a higher quality fertilizer, but that might not fall on your team. So really understanding the overall business objective and then starting to look at where your project fits into the bigger picture of everything that might be going on for that segment of the business that you're working with. After you have a good understanding of the business, it's time to dive in deeper and learn the job. This is one of my favorite parts that I like to do when I'm working with end users and customers. Job shadow. So what that means is fully embed yourself with the team that you're working with or with a person with multiple people on the team, either remote, in person, or both if you can, and really start to learn their job. Like I mentioned earlier, you are trying to learn the job that someone does day in and day out in a very condensed time period. So the best way to do that a lot of the times is to watch that person work. So if you're sitting by their side, you can listen to them taking phone calls. You can go out with them on sales calls. Really insert yourself into their daily work life and learn about what exactly they're doing. By watching them work, you're going to start hearing grumblings like, oh, the system never works, or I don't even know why I have to do this, but my boss tells me to do it this way, right? So you're really listening for those cues and clues that help you as an IT team member know how to help that person make their job even easier. I have been on so many sales ride-alongs, I can't even begin to tell you. And those were some of the most valuable sessions I ever did because I got to see how salespeople interact with their customers. And originally I was thinking that, why don't they use technology more in the field? But if you go on their sales calls with them, like, what are they supposed to do? Hold their laptop when they're talking to a customer and they're walking around outside? Like, that's not realistic, right? So you really get this view of what you're trying to implement is going to be realistic for them so you can see how they work and see what tools they might need in order to do their job effectively. When you're job shadowing, it's also important to discuss the handoffs with other teams. So, hey, I noticed that you got this contract entered. Now what happens? right? Because a lot of times they'll say, okay, well, I'm finished. I got my contract entered. I just have to do the next one now. Go ahead and ask that next question, right? We'll go back to our first bullet point of ask questions. So ask them, so what happens after you enter this contract? Does someone print it? Does the customer get a copy? Like, what happens after you do this? That's really important too, because again, the ultimate goal here is to get an idea of the whole process that the people you're working with follow. While you're learning the job, make note of terminology. I love this too, because I swear every different job and every different industry has their own subset of terminology, right? I'm looking at the slide right now, and on this slide, there are two acronyms that I did not write. We have Doug Webinars and MSDW, right? Two great sponsors, love them. But Dynamics User Group and Microsoft Dynamics World, right? So everybody has their own terminology. Everybody has their own acronyms. It's really important to make note of those as you're trying to learn the job, because you start to look more professional, and it really shows that you understand the business if you also start to use the terminology that they use day in and day out of their daily lives. What may seem like something that is totally unfamiliar with you when you start working with somebody will become more familiar if you start to integrate that terminology into your language when you're working with them as well. You can take notes in whatever way works well for you. Take them on your phone, take them in OneNote, handwrite them down for those of us that still use pen and paper, right? So just make note of them and try to work them into conversation where you can, because it's really important to understand how people speak and the terminology that they use when you're trying to understand how they do their job and what they do professionally. As you're learning the job, identify where this role fits into the larger business. So this ties into both of the previous 2 points that we had as well, right? Again, we're still trying to figure out that overall business process. And because you're doing that, it's really important to figure out where this person's role sits within the business. Are they a supervisor? Are they a manager? Do they have direct reports? If they are a supervisor, perhaps their system access needs to be different than the people who report to them. They also might need to view reports based off of things that their direct reports are doing, and they might need to report up to somebody at a higher level to be able to explain to them what their whole group is doing, right? So by identifying where their role fits within the larger business, you can start to think about ways to make their job easier, whether it's, collections of reports or sharing out information easier. So it's really important to understand where their whole role fits within the larger business. I also really like this one. So understanding the process. A lot of times you might start working with a department or a business and say, hey, do you have a process map of what you're doing? Because what you're trying to describe to me end to end does not make sense. And a lot of times people don't have that, right? Totally understandable. That's something that you get used to on the job is I come in every day, I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this. And this is my process and I just know it and I just do it. For somebody who doesn't do that job day in and day out, it can be really important to have a process map to be able to understand every step of that process. And as you're drawing it out, you may start to think about subpoints or additional detail that weren't originally discussed when you were meeting with that person. For example, you might write something down like customer approves contract, and then your next step would be they enter the contract into their system. Well, what if something is wrong on that contract? What if something is missing? How do they know if the information on that contract is correct? There may be steps that you want to add to this process of validation or double checking or revision that may not have been a part of that normal conversation, because again, it's just something that everybody comes in and does day in and day out, and they don't really stop and think twice about it. As you're trying to build out this process map, you really want to stop and clarify each step in the process, and then ultimately end up building out this entire process map. Within each step, you can identify the people and technology used. I love that as a sub-bullet point. Who does this? What do they use to get it there? It's Tiffany in sales, and She uses Excel and Outlook and her cell phone because she's texting customers to be able to figure out exactly what they need, right? By documenting this all down, you're ultimately going to be able to make good recommendations on this process once you have everything documented. So with that said, avoid making recommendations until you understand the whole process. I know I have a problem with this because my mind is always going a million miles a minute, and I'm always thinking like, okay, I know I can make this better. How can I make this better? But it's really important that you slow down and digest and understand the whole process before you start making those recommendations. By slowing down and really looking at the process, you're understanding where those handoffs occur, who's involved, and you can make sure that whatever tool you're building out to support these people in their new jobs or in their roles, it's going to impact everyone in this process, and you're not going to be handicapping anyone or handcuffing anyone to get them to do something that they can't do with the new technology that you're implementing. In order to create these maps, I like using Visio. I know there's other tools out there that you can use as well, but Visio really gives you that opportunity to build out a whole process map that includes various individuals, their technology that they use, and you can really make it as detailed as you need. You can come in, you can revise it, and once you have that whole process map made, sit down with the people that you've been talking to and review it with them. Say, is this correct? Did I understand this? And then again, all that's going to do is set you up for success for when it comes time for you to make recommendations to them in order to implement their new technology. We'll take a time out here and circle back as what you can do as an end user to support these processes as well. A lot of what I've talked about so far is looking at technical teams or IT teams and what they might need to do in order to support the end user community throughout a technology information gathering session. As an end user, I'm going to talk to this a little bit as well. And just remember that you and your project team should be BFFs. You guys should be best friends. Your technology team is coming in here to make your job easier, right? They don't want to make anything harder for you. And I know sometimes when you get used to doing the same job day in and day out, that it's easy, you know it, and technology change can be hard. But just remember that there's opportunity for improvement. And the reason this project is taking place is likely because there's room for positive change. So with that said, be patient with all the questions that you're being asked, right? The person who's coming in and asking all these questions is not familiar with your job like you are. You know way more than this person does about the job. And that's why they want to ask all these questions, is because they want to understand what you do and they want to understand your job. So answer all the questions. Don't give yes, no responses. Overshare. I don't think there can be oversharing with this, truthfully, but overshare. Share as much information as you can. Say, yes, we used to do that, but now we do it this way. And we do it this way because this. And even if your answer is, well, I do it this way because I was told to do it this way. Well, that is helpful. That's good for us to know, because we might ask a follow-up question saying, well, is it helpful? Like, is it helping you with this change? And we can really become your allies in this process. We, being your technology teams, can become your allies in this process and really help improve your processes. Another bullet point here, be honest and don't glorify. Truthfully, if something sucks, tell us it sucks. Sorry to be that harsh that way, but honestly, we want to hear it. And that goes for throughout the life cycle of a technology implementation as well. If you're not happy with something, say it. We want you to use this tool. If you're not going to use this tool, we want to know what we can do to help you and make it better. And sure, sometimes our explanations might be, well, that's the way the system works. I'm really sorry, I can't do much about that. But at least you brought it up and we're having open and honest conversation about that. And I think that's really the key here. If you don't know why you do something, share that as well. Say, I don't know, it doesn't really make sense to me. Let's think about a better way to do it. And then the end users and the IT teams can work together to come to a solution that might work well for everybody. Lastly, provide any documentation that you have that may be applicable. or screen share. So if somebody's asking you questions about a process and you're trying to talk it through, don't hesitate to say, hey, can I just show you? This is going to be way easier if I can just show you. Personally, I love seeing screenshots and I love seeing demos of how you use the software. Because a lot of the times when you give demos, you're giving your tech teams hints that you may not have thought to have said out loud. Like, for example, if you're tabbing through spreadsheets and we see you hit tab like 800 times, like, okay, maybe there's some room for efficiency there, right? Or maybe it's just the, I go here and then I go here. And even us watching you kind of fumble through a system can be really helpful as well. And with that documentation, that allows people to see really the step-by-step or how you're supposed to do things. And that may identify gaps as well. So if you have step-by-step documentation that you're not actually following, that's helpful as well, because then we know that, okay, there's a reason that they're not doing this. It's because it's hard. It's because it's cumbersome. It's because it doesn't provide any value. And so we like to know that as well. And truthfully, the reason I like documentation is because sometimes if I can get into your system and try things out myself to really step through and click through it, especially as someone who might be brand new to your environment or brand new to your systems, really I can identify some pain points quickly there as well if something might not be intuitive. So provide documentation, provide your million spreadsheets that you work off of. It's really helpful for your IT teams to be able to see that information. All right, the next section that we're going to go into here is how to work together on continuous and ongoing collaboration. So while that first section was focused on kind of kicking off and getting started with a new project or product, this section we're going to talk a little bit about how to continuously collaborate throughout the life cycle of a tool. The first tip that I have for our IT teams is to put yourself into their shoes, their being the end user. So understand how the users are going to interact with the tool. This, I think, is key, right? If you're putting something on a screen and the end users aren't going to click it, well, then maybe you should remove it from the screen if it's not supposed to be clicked. I know I've been in situations where a lot of times end users go, oh, what is this? And they start clicking buttons. And if it's going to cause problems and the answer is don't click it, then you should probably get it off the screen. Right? So it's always really important to think about how your users are going to interact with the tool that you're presenting to them. Something that might make sense technologically too, of like a really cool new feature or something that's awesome and brand new in Microsoft, just put it out there. But that might not be applicable for our users, right? It might be too advanced or they might not understand it, or it might be 10 steps ahead. So it's really important for you to pause, take a step back, think about what you're developing and thinking about how the end user might be interacting with the tool that you're putting out there. While you're developing, you should ask yourself these questions. Why are they asking for it? What problem are they trying to solve? How is it going to help them? Does it apply to everyone? And will this solve their problem? Because you ultimately don't want to be an order taker. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that term before, right? So ultimately, what does that mean to be an order taker? That means that somebody is coming to you saying, I need this, and you're going, okay, right? And while that can be fine in some situations, ultimately there should be more questions asked to make sure that you're providing a solution to the problem that they're trying to solve. I know this comes up a lot as you start having end users who are familiar with technology. They may start asking incredibly specific questions. I want a drop-down menu with these 3 options, and I want it put on the screen here. Right? And while that sounds like they know what they're talking about, I think it's always a good best practice to ask them, what are you going to use it for? What do you need this drop down for? Oh, it's because nobody really wants to use that text box. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm glad I asked that follow-up question because now I know that there's a text box on the screen that nobody is going to use. So do I need to eliminate it? Do I need to take the data out of that text box and make those options in the dropdown? How are we going to deprecate that old field, right? And it suddenly turns into more and a more thorough response on how to solve that customer's problem or your end user's problem. Ultimately, another good thing is, does this apply to everyone? We talked about this a few slides ago as well, but is someone coming to you with such a specific problem that it will solve only for them? And is that a good use of their time, right? So if someone's saying, this report, I really don't like how this column looks on it. Can you please move it over here? Is your team okay with this, right? That's usually a good follow-up question. Or you can, get into the larger conversation of application governance and trying to figure out approval steps, but that's a whole conversation for another day. But simply asking the question of, does everybody want this change? Is everybody on your team on board? And just starting to have that dialogue there to make sure that you're not developing to solve one person's problem when you may be causing problems for other people as well. Speak the language. I think this one is incredibly important because as you start doing your own job, you start using terminology that might not be familiar to everyone. So it's always really important to check yourself and make sure that you're using terminology that will resonate with the people that you're working with. Avoid using technology-specific terminology. I mentioned this earlier, but in our own careers, we all have different terminology that means something to us, right? And that terminology might not be familiar to everybody. So there might be some technology-specific terminology that isn't applicable if you're working with a sales team, for example. Like, do they really care that a yes/no field is a Boolean? I don't know, probably not, right? Or just certain examples like that, where you should just say, what do you want this to do? What options do you need to have? And using some of that specific terminology may not be necessary. And you might start losing people if you're having conversations with your end users and you're using terminology that you're not familiar with. You may start losing them in the conversation, and that's really not a good thing either when you're trying to engage and collaborate with them. Further, use that role-specific terminology you learned while you were job shadowing. If they were using terms that weren't familiar to you before, but now is a good opportunity for you to start using them, then start working them into your daily conversation. Show your end users that you truly understand what they said to you, that it resonated with you, and that you can say it back to them. Further, you can adapt to their language instead of pushing your language. I have used this example frequently as I've been working with certain development teams, but a lot of the times when I'm working with end users, instead of giving specific information on like back-end technology terminology, I will put it in terms that I know make sense to them. So going back to that example of like just saying, oh, you want to be able to just free type information into this field instead of saying, oh, it's a single line of text field. Or, when you click on this button, the new form opens. Well, they don't perhaps know what a new form is. So say you click this button, you'll be taken to a new screen, right? And again, I'll be a little bit cautious here in saying there is some value in educating your end users on what the terminology is. But the main key and the main takeaway here is to make sure that you're working in collaboration and adapting to your end user's language when it makes sense. So understanding who they are, what part of the business that they work in, and understanding what type of technology language you can use while you're collaborating with them is incredibly important. Answer the call. This one I love. So provide an avenue to receive questions and requests to your end users. So if they have questions, send me a Teams message, send me an email. Here's my personal cell phone number. Call me anytime just before 3 p.m. Just kidding. Whatever your availability is though, give people an option to reach out to you with questions and concerns. And be responsive. I know sometimes it can be hard when you're really busy and you're getting bogged down and you say, oh, I really don't have time for this right now. But you can really build that relationship with your end users by being responsive to them. So if you get a message, set expectations that I will be in touch with you within an hour. Or if that's not realistic, I will be in touch with you at least within 24 hours, right? Set those guidelines so your end users can know when to expect you to get back to them. So they're not wondering like, oh, I wonder if they got my email. And always keep an eye out for that high importance stuff too, right? Sometimes there may actually be an emergency, like if the system's down or something's broken or contracts aren't going from their CRM to their ERP, right? Really important things come up. And it's really important for you to keep an eye on those and just be aware of when those types of things are coming in. Spend the time to answer questions and hear ideas. This one is huge. Once end users start working with a platform or with a tool, they start getting lots of good information. And it might be hard sometimes to want to sit down with them and listen to all of their ideas because you're chugging forward, you have a list of things that you have to accomplish, but it really helps build trust and build that relationship if you can sit down with them and just spend a few minutes listening to their questions, answering their questions, hearing some ideas on ways to make the platform better. And even if your answer is, you know what, this is great, I'm going to write it down and we're going to revisit it later. I'll stick it in your backlog and we can talk about it later. That's a perfectly fine response too. But you know what you did? You took the time to hear their idea and you took the time to let them know that, hey, this will come up later. I don't have time for it now. You're laying down expectations, and that's totally perfectly fine to do. And to expand on that as well, be open about timelines and availability. You know, you don't want people to think that you're ignoring them. And if you truly are slammed and it's going to take you 24 hours typically to get back to people, just lay that expectation. Say, hey, I am very busy. I will do my best to get back to you within 24 hours. That is my goal. Then that's what they'll expect. Then they're not going to follow up with you 4 hours later and say, hey, did you get my email? Right? Communicate if you're going to be out of the office as far in advance as possible. If you're going to be out of the office, let your end users know as soon as you know so they can be prepared for that. I've seen people even put their out of office in their emails starting like 2 weeks before their vacation occurs. So say, FYI, I will be on vacation for these dates. And that is incredibly helpful because then people know they can plan for it and it's not a surprise you're out of the office and shoot, I needed something from you today. So just be open about timelines, communicate effectively with your end users. Provide recommendations. As someone who's on a tech team and someone who's been an end user, I've always enjoyed getting recommendations and giving recommendations, right? I think this is where a lot of the collaboration comes together. So you want to avoid giving recommendations too early in a project because you might not understand the process and what you're recommending truly might not fit to what your end users need or are expecting. So hold off too early. You'll find that sweet spot as you work on a project of saying, hey, you know what? I think this is the way that we need to go. And if a project gets implemented and it's moving into this area now for ongoing improvement and you think of something, let your end users know. Say, hey, you know what? I was thinking about your process last night before I went to bed because that's where we have all the good ideas, right? Grab that notebook on your nightstand, write down all your good ideas, but just let them know, hey, I was thinking about this and I have this idea and I think it's going to make your life easier. If they say no, they say no. But chances are they'll say, that's a really great idea. Because you know what? As someone who's on their tech team, you know their software often better than they do. Sometimes that might not be the case, but you know, you might have ideas and say, hey, this new technology came out. I think this can replace or enhance this process. And let them know. Don't shy away from it. And don't be afraid to be told no. Some people might say, you know what, we're just getting used to the tool. Please don't change anything on us. And that's totally fine, right? Just take that and say, okay, thought I'd put it out there. If they say something like, not right now, but maybe later, you know what you do with that? Stick it in the backlog, write it down, take it as a discussion that you had on whatever day, and then circle back to that later. Along that, help them create a process for tracking requests and ideas. So as their IT team member or their consultant, you will be giving them ideas, and your end users will also be coming up with ideas. So help work with them to create a process for keeping track of those requests and those ideas that come in, because that way they won't lose track of them and they can start implementing them into their project as the end users are ready for it. And lastly, remember you're the product expert, they're the process expert. And maybe you're the process expert once you start spending enough time with them and getting some job shadowing done. But ultimately, you may know more about the technology than they do. So if there is room for improvement, bring it up to them, work together to collaborate to identify what might make their lives easier. As an end user, these are some important things you can do to help your technology teams. Just like I said for the IT teams, it's important for end users to also learn the language. As I previously mentioned, there might be some roles or positions that aren't going to learn the language. And that's fine. And that happens, right? But just kind of collaborate with each other, try to learn where you can and step in, because oftentimes that'll help to identify issues sooner. If you can very specifically say, I'm having an issue with this field on this form or whatever, then by speaking the IT team's language, they might start to pick up on it a little bit quicker and be able to resolve your problem sooner. Also, offer to help, express interest. We are talking about how to be collaborative between IT teams and end users, and this is a very big one. As an end user, show that you're interested in what's going on. Say, hey, I'd really like to see how you configured that because that seems really cool. If it's something you're interested in, ask. Technology teams, IT people love to share their knowledge. So if you think something is cool or was configured in an interesting way, ask them how they did it, and we'd be happy to share. So reach out, make the call. Don't sit at your desk frustrated that the technology is not doing what you want it to do. Give a call to someone, send an email, send a Teams message. Even if it's a frustrated one, I've gotten those before of just like, oh my gosh, I've done this 1,000 times. I'm so annoyed, I can't do my job. It's like, okay, I will sit with you, I will talk with you, and I will help figure out how to make this easier. I know sometimes that can be hard because you're not sure if it's a system limitation, you're not sure if it's something that can be fixed, but you know what? You're not gonna know unless you ask. So ask for sure. Just reach out to your teams, say, I'm not sure how to fix this or if it can be fixed, but please go ahead and fix this for me. Lastly, listen and understand the recommendations before providing feedback. Like I mentioned, your technology teams are going to be giving you recommendations and feedback throughout the life cycle of a project. And it's really important for you to listen to those and understand them before giving that feedback. So if your tech team comes to you and gives some crazy outlandish thing and you're like, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. Instead of just saying no immediately, ask some questions. So follow up, right? These are some of the tips that I was giving directly to the IT teams a little bit earlier in the session, and the same applies to you. You can ask, hey, why do you think that's going to work for us? What have I said that makes you think that that's going to work? Just any type of follow-up questions like that to increase some dialogue and truly understand before just saying, not going to do it. And conversely, instead of saying, yes, I'm so excited, let's implement all this new technology, maybe ask some questions like, how many people is this going to impact? How much money is this going to cost, right? And start asking those types of questions before just excitedly rolling in and saying yes. Even though we really do like the excited yeses, I know it is important to ask those follow-ups as well, just to, again, gain alignment, make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, communicate. If you are out of budget, you're running out of time, you're running behind, let your end users know. There's nothing worse than having those last minutes, hey, we have no money left, I'm really sorry. Or hey, we're running out of time, I'm not gonna get this done on time. As soon as you have these warning signs, communicate them over to your end users. That said, it's really key to conquer the tough conversations early. I'm sure you all have been getting this advice throughout your life, right? But it's better to just pull the tablecloth out from the table, or however that saying goes. But it's really important to just have those conversations early. Rip the Band-Aid off. It just came to me. Thank you. Okay, so conquer those tough conversations early. If something isn't going right, or if you're encountering a roadblock, or if something you previously thought you could do, you actually can't do, have that conversation. Solution together. Again, this is a partnership. Work through those issues together. Lastly, be open, honest, and proactive. So all of these things that I've mentioned kind of tie together in the sense that we're just communicating as soon as we can and as often as possible. We're giving honest feedback. You know what, you had a really good idea. The system has a limitation that's preventing me to do that, but let's come up with a better solution together. And again, being proactive, giving those communications as early and as often as possible. Be an ally. Love this one. I've said that a lot, but these are good tips. So go to bat for each other. This is a true partnership between your end users and your technology teams, and support each other. Just because you sit on the technology team or you sit on the business side and you're an end user doesn't mean you can't support each other. So if something is going awry, and the IT team is doing what they can, and you're an end user, say, hey, you know what? I know this project is running over timeline. However, I have asked for extensions and I have asked for additional functionality. So I'm more than okay with this going over timeline, right? Ultimately, even though you may sit on different teams, you're on the same team for this project or for this product. And ultimately, you're all working to work together closely. Offer to partner with users on tough conversations or to get leadership buy-in. I've had this one come up quite a few times as well, where I have some end users who are like, you have no idea how much time this would save me and how important it is. But my boss tells me, no, we don't have time to work on it right now. Then say, would you be okay if I bridge that conversation for you? I am happy to have that conversation with leadership to help you express the business value in making these changes, right? If you can partner with each other and help out in that way, you're really building that trust and building that relationship. You can also offer to learn that tool or get more involved with the technology as an end user. So if you want to, or as a tech team, if there are other tools used that you're not directly involved with, you can offer to learn those and say, hey, I'm more than happy to help you out and to understand all of the underlying technology here. Couple bonus items that I have in here for project specific items. First things first, demo early and often. A lot of times it's really hard for end users to visualize what a tool is going to look like. So as soon as you have something that you can put in front of them, get it in front of them and start asking for feedback. Work iteratively. So once you get that feedback, then bring it back to your technology teams, have them implement some of those changes, and then demo it again for your end users and ask them, hey, is this what you were expecting, right? Do that throughout the life cycle of a project and you'll be very successful. Work hands-on with end users. Once your tool goes live, offer to do testing with them, offer to do training with them, offer to sit with the users hands-on and help them and support them to become more familiar with the technology. A lot of the times, repeat training is needed. That's the only way people learn technology, is they have to be told something multiple times or shown it multiple times because it might not be familiar to them. And if you've been really close to a tool and you've been creating and developing it, chances are you know that tool inside and out. And users that you're giving this tool to fresh for the first time may need to be shown at least a few times on how to use it. And instead of sending paper instructions and saying, there you go, good luck, it can be really helpful to sit with them, say, hey, can you share your screen? Let me watch what you're doing and truly work together and make sure that the end users are using the tool as they're supposed to or as the tool is intended. So with that, what we just went through was some project-specific items on how to collaborate between end users and IT technical teams. And I wanted to present these examples to you of how to build team collaboration across the business and across IT to end up with very successful projects and products and collaborate together on an ongoing basis. We all know that technology is iterative and there's always ways to improve it and make it better. And by building that trust between the IT teams and your businesses, you're really going to continue collaborating closely, recognizing when it's time for an improvement or an enhancement, and collaborating together to get those tools successful and out the door so they can be used. So thank you for your time today. You're more than welcome to connect with me on any of the platforms mentioned here. I really appreciate Doug Webinars for allowing me to come in and talk to this today and for MS Dynamics World for sponsoring. So thanks everyone. I hope you learned a little bit about team collaboration and reach out to me if there's anything I can do to help. Bye.